The air in the hangar always smells of cold grease and old secrets. It's a vast, hollow space that echoes with every step I take, a metallic cavern that feels more like a tomb than a workshop. In the center sits the Gulf Stream, its silver skin dull under the flickering fluorescent lights, looking like a grounded bird with broken wings. This plane is the only thing my parents left me that hasn't been picked apart by the lawyers or stained by the greedy fingerprints of my loving family. It's my inheritance, my sanctuary, and lately, my most expensive failure. I dragged my hand along the fuselage, the cold aluminum biting into my palm. Every time I looked at the engine housing, I felt a familiar surge of bile. 3 different mechanics had been in here over the last 6 months. Each one came highly recommended by my Uncle Marcus, and each one left the plane in worse shape than they found it. It didn't take a genius to figure out the pattern. They weren't here to fix it. They were here to ensure it stayed on the ground until I was desperate enough to sign over full management of the entire estate. I'm 24, and I've spent the last 2 years learning that blood isn't thicker than water. It's just more expensive. I've become a master of the sharp exit and the even sharper retort. If I keep people at a distance, they can't get close enough to find the weak points they're so eager to exploit. My therapist, the one I fired last month, called it a defensive manifestation of trauma. I just call it staying alive. I checked my watch. The new hire was late. I'd gone around Marcus this time, using a burner phone and a contact I'd made in a London airfield. I needed someone who didn't know my name, someone who wasn't on the payroll of a dozen different shell companies. I needed a ghost. The heavy steel side door groaned on its hinges, letting in a sliver of the gray. Overcast morning. A figure stepped through, silhouetted against the dull light. She was carrying a heavy canvas tool bag that looked like it had seen better decades. She didn't look like the high-priced consultants Marcus usually sent. She was wearing charcoal gray coveralls, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with lean muscle. Her hair was a short, practical crop, pushed back from a face that looked like it was carved from something much harder than clay. She didn't look around in awe at the private facility or the luxury vehicles tucked in the far corner. She looked straight at the plane, then straight at me. Her eyes were a piercing, steady amber, devoid of the practiced sycophancy I was used to from everyone around me. "You're the one who called," she said. Her voice was low, like the hum of a distant turbine. "You're late," I snapped, crossing my arms over my chest. I felt the familiar itch to push, to see where the breaking point was. I don't pay for people to wander in whenever the mood strikes. I pay for results, and so far, this plane is a multi-million-dollar paperweight. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just set her bag down with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed through the hangar. "I spent 20 minutes at your gate being interrogated by a security guard who thinks he's Secret Service. If you want punctuality, tell your hired help to let the people you've contracted do their jobs." I felt a jolt of sharp surprise. Nobody spoke to me like that. Not the staff, not the relatives who circled my fortune like vultures, not the few remaining friends who only called when they needed a favor. "I can have you replaced by noon," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She wiped a smudge of grease from her thumb and looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my silk blouse and the expensive watch I wore like a badge of my family's legacy. "You could, but then you'd be back to letting your relatives' cronies strip the wiring out of your engines. You want this thing to fly, or do you just want someone to yell at?" I stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. She was standing there, smelling of rain and motor oil, looking at me like I was the one who was out of place in my own hangar. Her nose was straight, her jawline sharp, and there was a smudge of carbon on her cheek that she didn't seem to care about. She was the first person in years who had looked at me and seen something other than a paycheck or a helpless victim. "The diagnostic reports are in the office," I said, my voice much tighter than I intended. "Don't touch anything else." She didn't even look back as she headed toward the plane. "I'll touch what needs fixing. Stay out of the way if you don't want to get dirty." I watched her walk toward the engine, her movements efficient and devoid of wasted energy. I resented her unshakable composure already. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. She spent the first hour in silence, moving around the Gulf Stream with the focused intensity of a surgeon. She ran a hand over the seams, tapped on the engine cowlings, and peered into the landing gear wells with a penlight held between her teeth. I sat in my glass-walled office overlooking the hangar floor, watching her every move, waiting for the telltale signs of sabotage. A quick photo sent from a hidden phone, a furtive glance toward the security cameras, a hesitation that wasn't rooted in professional care. There was nothing. She was a closed system, a self-contained unit of purpose. When she finally came into the office, she didn't bother to wipe the grease from her hands. She laid out the previous mechanics reports on my polished mahogany desk, her smudged fingerprints a violation of its pristine surface. "This is a mess," she stated, tapping a finger on a schematic. "These guys weren't mechanics. They were butchers. The fuel line calibrations are off, the hydraulic pressure is inconsistent, and someone has deliberately stripped the threads on the primary turbine bolts. You're lucky this thing didn't catch fire on the ground, let alone if you tried to take it airborne." Her tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. It made the reality of my situation feel colder, sharper. "So you can fix it?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I can," she said, "but it's going to be a full teardown of the starboard engine. I'll need new parts, custom ordered. And I'll need you to stay out of my way while I work." The audacity of it set my teeth on edge. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my property. I'll be here to make sure you're not another butcher." A flicker of something, amusement, maybe, crossed her face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared.
"Fine.
"Watch all you want. Just don't talk to me when I'm working on the turbine assembly. It requires focus you clearly don't appreciate." That was how our days began. I'd arrive at dawn, a cup of expensive coffee in hand, and watch from my office or from a safe distance on the hangar floor. She moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation. The clatter of her tools became the soundtrack to my life. The precise click of a socket wrench, the hiss of a pneumatic drill, the low hum of the diagnostic computers. She never played music. The only sounds were the ones made by her and the machine. She was an island, and I was the hostile ocean lapping at her shores. My supervision quickly morphed into a series of calculated provocations. I was testing her, looking for the crack, the moment she would break and reveal her true allegiance to Marcus. "I need coffee." I'd call out from the office, knowing she was elbow-deep in hydraulic fluid. Without looking up, she'd nod toward the kitchenette. "Pot's on." Another time, I deliberately hit a specific wrench she'd been using, tucking it behind a stack of oil drums. I watched her search for it, her movements methodical. When she couldn't find it, she simply went to her tool bag and pulled out a spare, not missing a beat. The small, cruel victory I'd hoped for dissolved into a film of self-loathing. "Explain the Bernoulli principle to me," I demanded one afternoon, standing over her as she rewired a complex avionics panel. She didn't stop her work. "It's about differential pressure creating lift. You have a multi-million-dollar library in this building. Look it up." Her refusal to engage in my petty games was infuriating. It was also, to my deep and unsettling confusion, deeply respectable. She wasn't afraid of me. She saw my tantrums for what they were, the flailing of a drowning person. Her stoicism wasn't weakness, it was a wall I couldn't breach, and it made me feel, for the first time, like the weaker one. One day, I pushed too far. "Maybe if you spent less time staring at the engine and more time working, this would be done by now," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. She finally stopped, setting a torque wrench down with a deliberate, echoing click. She turned to face me, wiping her hands on a rag. Her amber eyes were flat, unreadable. "You know, for someone whose life depends on this machine working perfectly, you seem remarkably determined to distract the one person who can make that happen. All you do is sit there and watch, waiting for something to go wrong. You're like a child who keeps poking a healing wound to see if it still hurts." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Because they were true. I wasn't just watching her. I was watching for the inevitable betrayal. "You don't know anything about me," I whispered, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a cold hollowness. "I know I'm the only person who's told you the truth in a long time," she said, turning back to the engine. "Now, are you going to let me do my job, or are you going to keep making this harder for both of us?" I didn't answer. I just retreated to my office and watched the hangar lights cast long shadows around her, a lone figure fighting to fix something I had long since accepted as broken. The confrontation I'd been dreading arrived on a Tuesday. I saw the familiar black sedan pull up to the hangar gates on the security monitor. Uncle Marcus and two of my cousins, flanked by a man in a suit I didn't recognize, one of the family's lawyers. My own legal team had warned me they'd try for a competency hearing to have me declared unfit to manage my own affairs. The intercom buzzed, a shrill, insistent sound. I ignored it. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the walls of the hangar suddenly closing in. The air grew thick, heavy. I could hear my father's voice, the last time I saw him, telling me to be strong, that vultures only circle what they think is already dead. The buzzing stopped, replaced by a heavy, aggressive banging on the main door. My breath hitched. I backed away from the desk, stumbling into a chair. The hangar, my only safe space, felt like a trap. Through the glass, I saw her look up from her work, her brow furrowed. She saw me, curled in the chair, my hands over my ears. The banging grew louder, more insistent. She strode to the intercom panel near the door, her face set like stone. "Private property," she said into the receiver, her voice calm and authoritative. "The owner is not accepting visitors. Leave now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing and harassment." A muffled, angry voice shouted back through the speaker. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was one of entitled rage. My uncle's tone. She didn't argue. She simply switched off the intercom, walked to the main breaker panel, and threw a heavy switch. With a deep groan, the emergency lockdown shutters began to descend over the hangar doors, sealing us inside. The sound of the outside world was cut off, replaced by a profound, sudden silence. She didn't come to the office. She didn't offer empty, comforting words. She just went back to the engine, picked up her tools, and resumed her work. The steady, rhythmic sound of her wrench turning became an anchor in the storm of my panic. She had built a wall around me, not with words, but with steel and action. She hadn't asked for permission. She had just protected the space and the person who'd hired her. I sat there for a long time, watching her work under the emergency lights, and the frantic beating in my chest slowly, painstakingly, subsided. After the lockdown incident, something shifted. The air between us was still charged, but the hostility had dissipated, replaced by a quiet, unspoken truce. I stopped the pointless tests. She, in turn, began to fill the silence between us. It started small. While waiting for a diagnostic program to run, she'd sit on an upturned crate and tell me about the challenges of being one of the only women in her certification program. She spoke of the condescension, the deliberate sabotage from male colleagues, the constant need to be twice as good to get half the credit. She didn't tell these stories with anger or self-pity, but with a kind of weary resignation that I understood on a cellular level. We were fighting different wars, but we both knew the exhaustion of the battlefield. I started bringing 2 coffees in the morning instead of 1. I ordered lunch for the hangar, leaving a container on a clean workbench for her without a word. One evening, I found her still working late, the plans for the engine spread out under a single task light. I walked to the kitchenette, made her a sandwich, and left it beside her with a bottle of water. She looked up, startled, as if just realizing how many hours had passed. "Thanks," she murmured, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I just nodded, retreating to my office. We were 2 solitary planets that had drifted into a shared, stable orbit. The hangar was our universe, the silent plane the sun we both revolved around. For the first time since my parents died, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or anger. It was a strange, fragile thing, like a seedling pushing through concrete. It felt a little like hope. The starboard engine was almost complete. It sat gleaming in the fuselage, a masterpiece of reassembled steel and precision wiring. She was running the final system checks, a quiet satisfaction in the set of her shoulders. I allowed myself to feel a genuine spark of excitement. Soon I could fly away. I could finally leave the vultures and their gilded cages behind. That morning, she was focused on a small but vital component, the custom-milled fuel regulator. It was a unique piece, designed specifically for this Gulfstream model, and there wasn't another one like it on this side of the Atlantic. Only the 2 of us had access to the secure parts locker where it was stored. I left for a few hours to meet with my accountant, a tense, draining affair that left my nerves frayed. When I returned, the hangar was silent. She was standing by the engine, her back to me, perfectly still. "What's wrong?" I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. She turned slowly. Her face was pale. "The fuel regulator. It's gone." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, gone?" "It was locked in the locker." "I know. I put it there myself last night. This morning, the lock was jimmied." "It's gone," she repeated, her voice flat. As she spoke, my phone buzzed with an alert from my bank. It was a notification I'd set up for any large, unapproved transactions. I glanced down. A wire transfer had just cleared. A deposit of $100,000 into an account I didn't recognize. But the sender was a shell corporation owned by my uncle Marcus. The recipient's name was listed in the transaction details. Her name, Jessie Hale. The world tilted on its axis. The fragile trust we had built shattered into a million pieces. The coffee, the shared silence, the wall of steel she'd built around me. It was all a lie. A long, elaborate con. She wasn't a ghost. She was just another one of his puppets, the most clever one he'd ever hired. The pain was sharp, physical, a blade twisting in my gut. It wasn't just about the plane anymore. It was a betrayal so profound it stole the air from my lungs. Rage, white-hot and blinding, consumed me. It was a familiar cloak, a weapon I knew how to wield. I stormed across the hangar floor, the damning bank notification glowing on my phone screen. "You," I spat, my voice shaking with a fury that was part anger, part gut-wrenching betrayal. All this time, it was all an act. She looked at me, her expression of confusion slowly hardening as I shoved the phone in her face. "What is this? Don't play dumb with me," I screamed, the sound echoing in the vast space. $100,000 from my uncle, and the one part that can't be replaced suddenly vanishes. It's a neat little trick. Keep me busy, gain my trust, and then cripple the plane for good. I was unhinged, all the old paranoia roaring back to life. I saw her tool cart beside her and, in a fit of pure, destructive grief, I shoved it. Tools scattered across the concrete floor with a deafening, metallic crash. Wrenches, screwdrivers, gauges, the instruments of her trade, now just evidence of her deceit, in my eyes. "Get out," I shrieked, pointing toward the door. "Get your blood money, and get out of my sight. I hope you enjoy it. You earned it." She didn't shout back. She didn't defend herself in that moment. She just looked at me, and the expression in her amber eyes was worse than any argument. It was a deep, searing disappointment. She looked at me as if I was the one who had broken something irreparable. Without a word, she knelt and began to methodically pick up her scattered tools, her movements slow and deliberate. She placed each one back into her canvas bag, the silence in the hangar thick with my accusations. When she was done, she stood, slung the bag over her shoulder, and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold, her back still to me. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the hangar, "I thought you were stronger than this." Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the wrecked pieces of my trust and the silent, broken plane. The silence she left behind was suffocating. I spent the next 2 days in the hangar, a ghost haunting the scene of my own folly. The half-finished engine was a monument to my stupidity. Sleep didn't come. I just replayed our final conversation. The crash of her tools, the look of profound disappointment on her face. A small, treacherous part of my mind whispered that I had made a terrible mistake, but I crushed it. Betrayal was the only language my family spoke. Why should she be any different? On the third day, they came. Uncle Marcus, looking triumphant, with 2 new mechanics in tow, burly men who looked more like hired thugs than technicians, their tool bags already open to reveal cutting equipment. "Leah, darling," Marcus said, his voice oozing false concern. "We heard your little prodigy walked out. Don't you worry. We've brought in some proper professionals to finish the job." They strode toward the plane, their intentions clear. They weren't here to finish the job. They were here to dismantle it piece by piece, both literally and legally. This was the final move. With the plane permanently grounded and me declared unstable after firing the only competent mechanic, they would have everything they needed for the competency hearing. Worse, I realized with a sickening jolt, they planned to sabotage the engine beyond repair, then plant evidence that I'd ordered the shoddy work, to seal my fate in court. I tried to stop them, to block their path, but I was one person. They brushed past me as if I were a ghost. "This is for your own good, Leah," my cousin smirked. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over me. I retreated to the cockpit, my father's seat, and locked the door. I was trapped. I had driven away the one person who might have been able to help, and now the wolves were at the door. I rested my forehead against the cold glass of the windshield, looking out at the men preparing to tear apart the last piece of my history. I had lost. Just as one of the new mechanics was prying open the engine cowling with a crowbar, the hangar's lockdown siren blared. The heavy steel shutters began to descend once more, plunging the space into the familiar red-tinted emergency lighting. Marcus and his men froze, confused and alarmed. Then, the side door opened. Jessie stood there, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Behind them was the hangar's head of security, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face pale with fear. My uncle's face went from smug to ashen in a second. "What is the meaning of this?" he blustered. Jessie ignored him, her eyes finding mine through the cockpit window. She walked directly to the engine, pulled a small, oil-stained cloth from her pocket, and unwrapped the missing fuel regulator. She held it up for the officers to see. "This part was reported stolen 3 days ago," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It was found in the security chief's personal locker, along with a handwritten note detailing the payment he received to steal it. He confessed that he was paid $10,000 by Mr. Marcus here to steal the part, plant the fake transfer, and allow these men," she gestured to the 2 fake mechanics, "access to sabotage the aircraft beyond repair." One of the officers stepped forward, producing a thick file. "We also have a flagged report from the bank's fraud department. The $100,000 transfer was reported as an unsolicited and suspicious transaction by Ms. Hale within 5 minutes of it appearing in her account. She had the funds frozen immediately, and we traced the transfer back to a shell corporation registered in your name, Mr. Marcus." The whole story unfolded like a perfectly executed flight plan. She hadn't run. The moment I threw her out, she had gone to work. She knew the theft was a setup. She knew the transfer was a plant. She hadn't left me. She had gone to fight for me, in the shadows, using her own methods. She had been collecting evidence, not just on the theft, but on the entire web of sabotage, tracing the previous 3 mechanics back to Marcus, securing signed statements that they'd been paid to deliberately damage the plane. She hadn't just saved the plane. She had saved me, and my entire future. I stumbled out of the cockpit, my legs unsteady, and watched as the police escorted my uncle and his cronies out of my hangar for the last time. The hangar was quiet again, the only sounds the faint hum of the emergency lights and the frantic beating of my own heart. Jessie stood by the engine, wiping her hands on a rag, the recovered fuel regulator sitting on a clean cloth beside her. I walked toward her, my throat tight. The weight of my accusations, the memory of her scattered tools, pressed down on me. I started, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm so sorry." It was a pathetic whisper in the cavernous space. She finally looked at me, and there was no triumph in her eyes. "No, I told you so." There was just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "I know," she said quietly. "No, you don't," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I was horrible. I accused you of the worst thing imaginable. I destroyed your tools. I threw you out. I didn't trust you. After everything, I still didn't trust you." She held my gaze, her expression softening. "Leah, they've spent years conditioning you to expect the worst from people. It's all you've ever known. When you're cornered, you bite. I get it. I just wish you'd bitten them instead of me." She paused, then added, her voice dropping lower, "I know you were just scared." Those words, "I know you were just scared," undid me. She saw past the rage, past the heiress facade, past the defensive shell, and saw the terrified girl huddled inside. Tears I hadn't shed in years burned my eyes. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. Instead, I picked up a clean rag, found a can of solvent, and began to wipe the grime from the engine cowling where the fake mechanics had put their hands. She watched me for a moment, then nodded. "Good," she said. "We've got work to do." We spent the rest of the night working side by side under the harsh lights. She installed the fuel regulator, and I handed her tools, cleaned parts, and followed her instructions without question. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. In the shared, silent work of putting the plane back together, we were rebuilding something far more important, a trust that had been broken, but would now be forged stronger than steel. By dawn, the engine was whole. The evidence she had gathered was airtight. It wasn't just about the stolen part. She had found a paper trail, text messages, and bank records that painted a clear picture of a years-long conspiracy to defraud and endanger me. My uncle's empire crumbled in a matter of weeks. The legal battles were swift and brutal, but this time, I wasn't fighting alone. She sat with me through every deposition, a silent, steady presence in a room full of sharks. When it was all over, and the estate was finally, irrevocably mine, I felt a strange emptiness. The war was over. I had won, but the person who had handed me the victory was facing the consequences. My relatives, in a final act of spite, had used their remaining influence to poison the well. They contacted every major aviation firm she had ever worked for, spreading lies about her incompetence, theft, and unreliability. She was blacklisted across the industry. The career she had built with her own 2 hands was being systematically dismantled because she had chosen to help me. I found her one afternoon looking at job postings on her laptop, her face etched with frustration. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I had the money, the power, the freedom she had secured for me, and she was facing ruin for standing by me. "Close it," I said, standing in front of her. She looked up, confused. "Close what?" "The laptop," I said. "You're not going to beg for a job from any of them. You're going to work for yourself. With me." I didn't just give her money. We became equal partners. We spent a month drafting a bulletproof business plan. We leased a new, state-of-the-art hangar at the other end of the airfield. We designed it from the ground up, not just as a premium aircraft repair shop, but as a fully accredited training facility. The sign we eventually hung over the door read Phoenix Aviation, a name we'd chosen together for the way we'd both risen from the ashes of our own battles. Our mission was simple and radical: to create a safe, equitable space for women in a field that had tried for decades to keep them out. Our first hires were the top female graduates from every aviation mechanics program in the country, women who, like Jessie, were tired of having to prove themselves at every turn, tired of the condescension and sabotage. Jessie was in her element. She was a natural leader, patient with the trainees, but uncompromising in her demand for excellence. She moved through the new workshop with a quiet confidence I had never seen before, her authority earned through skill and respect, not title or wealth. I, in turn, found a new purpose. I wasn't hiding behind my inheritance anymore. I was wielding it for good. I handled the business operations, the logistics, the finances, and the endless stream of bureaucratic nonsense. I ran interference, protecting Jessie and our team from the old boys club that wanted to see us fail. We were a two-woman army, each covering the other's flank. My old hangar was no longer a cage. It was the foundation of a fortress we had built together. The pushback was immediate and vicious. The established repair shops on the airfield saw us as an existential threat. Rumors started to fly that our all-female team was a publicity gimmick, that we didn't have the experience, that a plane serviced by us was unsafe. Suppliers mysteriously canceled our long-negotiated contracts. Potential clients would book consultations and then never show up, scared off by the industry's smear campaign. The pressure mounted. I could see the toll it was taking on Jessie. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders were constantly tensed. She was carrying the weight of not just her own future, but the futures of all the young women we had hired, who had left stable jobs to join our mission. I found her late one night in the empty workshop, sitting on the floor with her head in her hands, a single tear tracing a clean path through the grease on her cheek. The sight broke my heart. I sat down next to her, on the cold concrete. I didn't say it's going to be okay. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I just sat with her in the silence, a steady presence beside her. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice thick. "Maybe they're right, Leah. Maybe I can't do this." "That's nonsense," I said, my voice fierce with conviction. "They're not attacking your skill. They're attacking you because you're winning. We're winning. You've built something here that scares them because it proves they don't get to control this industry anymore." I nudged her shoulder with mine. "You have the talent. I have the resources. We are not going to let a bunch of insecure men shut us down. We fight back. Together." The next day, I called a press conference. I invited every aviation journalist in the state. I stood in front of my gleaming Gulfstream, the plane Jessie had saved, the plane that had started it all, and I told them our story. I told them about the years of sabotage, the industry-wide prejudice against female aviation professionals, and the incredible skill of the woman who is changing the industry from the inside out. I announced a new, fully endowed scholarship fund, funded entirely by my estate, for women entering aviation mechanics programs across the country. I turned the whispers into a roar. And Jessie was standing right beside me, her back straight, her eyes shining, ready for the fight. The day the Gulfstream received its final airworthiness certificate was bright and cloudless. The silver fuselage gleamed in the sun, no longer a monument to my isolation, but a symbol of our shared victory. Our team, the brilliant young women Jessie was mentoring, gathered on the tarmac to see us off. Jessie was in the pilot seat, I was in the co-pilot's. She went through the pre-flight checklist, her voice a calm, steady murmur that filled the cockpit. Her hands moved over the controls with an innate familiarity, as if they were an extension of her own body. "Ready?" she asked, turning to me. "Ready," I replied, my voice more certain than it had ever been in my life. The engine spooled up with a deep, powerful roar. The plane vibrated around us, alive and eager. We taxied onto the runway, and with a final clearance from the tower, she pushed the throttles forward. The acceleration pressed me back into my seat as the world outside became a blur. And then, with a feeling of impossible lightness, we were airborne. We climbed, banking over the airfield where our new hangar stood like a beacon. We ascended through the haze, breaking into the unfiltered, brilliant blue of the upper atmosphere. Below us, the world stretched out, a tapestry of greens and browns. The problems on the ground seemed so small from up here. She leveled us off, the plane humming contentedly. The sunlight streamed into the cockpit, bathing everything in a warm, golden light. She was looking at me, a wide, genuine smile on her face, her eyes reflecting the endless blue sky. The accumulated gratitude, the respect, the profound, unshakable bond we had forged in grease and steel and trust, it all swelled in my chest. I reached over, and in a gesture as natural as breathing, clasped her hand in mine, giving it a firm, grateful squeeze. It was a gesture of loyalty, of partnership, of thanks that words could never capture. She blinked, surprised, then her smile widened. She squeezed my hand back, a simple, affirming touch that said everything we didn't need to put into words. We didn't land for hours. We flew north along the coast, watching the sun dip toward the Pacific. We didn't need to talk. We had built our story not with empty words, but with silent support, with wrenches and legal briefs, with shared coffee and shared battles. When we finally touched down on our own runway, the tarmac was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. We stepped out of the plane and into the cool evening air. The team was gone, the hangars were dark, and the airfield was quiet. We stood there for a long time, side by side, looking at the silver plane that had brought us together. It was no longer a cage for me, or just a job for her. It was the wings we had forged for each other. I was no longer the angry, scared girl hiding from the world. She had shown me that strength wasn't about building walls to keep everyone out, but about knowing who to stand beside. And she was no longer the solitary mechanic, fighting her battles alone. I had given her a place to land, a community to build, the resources to turn her hard-earned skill into a lasting legacy. She nudged my arm, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the last vestiges of sunlight were fading. "So," she said, her voice soft in the quiet air. "Where to next?" I looked at her, at the quiet confidence in her face, at the steadfast loyalty in her eyes. I thought of the obstacles we had overcome and the ones that still lay ahead. But for the first time in my life, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an open sky. "Anywhere," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "As long as we go together." We were more than friends. We were equal partners. We were each other's sanctuary, each other's strength. The flight was over, but our journey was just beginning. And whatever came next, we would face it, side by side, with the whole horizon ahead of us.